Everyone, and welcome back to Always Watching. Today I'm continuing my coverage for the Tribeca Film Festival with a documentary and update on our family. So briefly, the documentary recounts the traumatic story of Myka and James Stauffer, family vloggers whose YouTube empire collapsed when they adopted Huxley, a young boy from China. The three-part documentary explores the Stauffers as well as the ethics of family channels on YouTube. The title of the documentary refers to the infamous last video by the Stauffers explaining why they rehomed their son Huxley. The video essentially made them public enemy number one. The documentary interviews several journalists, family vloggers, fans of the Stauffer to really unpack their impact on YouTube. Personally, I had never heard of the Stauffers prior to this rehoming incident. And whenever YouTubers make the mainstream, it's always an infamy. Like, this story was all over mainstream media, the BBC, it was just all over the place. The documentary is very textbook in terms of how it's divided. If you already know a lot about the Stauffers and family vloggers, you will not find it that informative. For me personally, I really found it to be entertaining. The first episode discusses family vloggers, introduces us to all the individuals that will be interviewed. The second episode is more about the adoption, and the third is the aftermath. Personally, I did enjoy this documentary. I think it did a good job of using the Stauffer family as a way to look into the ethics of family channels. The Stauffers were very special in that they were the pioneers of this genre. The way they were able to make their subscribers feel like they were a part of the family, and also just build anticipation for each and every video. Like, people would look out for their content. Prior to their channel, Myka actually had her own channel. She was a single mother, and she met James on a dating app, and then they started this family channel together. I think one of my biggest criticisms of how this story was told in the mainstream and even by YouTubers is how Myka was like the mastermind of everything, when in fact, Myka and James were a team, and they very much made all their decisions together. Although the Stauffer family's channel has been taken down, James still has his channel up, and it has nothing to do with their family, but I do think there is a double standard here. This is something for you to think about when you're watching this documentary. Both Myka and James are very skilled content creators. They knew how to put themselves in the best light, and they were really good at using their family to tell a story their viewers would find entertaining. They were also trailblazers in terms of exploring the limits of family channels on YouTube. Myka would film her pregnancies, her deliveries, talk about her time being pregnant, her post-pregnancy experience. It was very intimate and very detailed. One of the questions the documentary makes well is how complicit is YouTube in terms of drawing these red lines in what these family channels are able to show regarding their children and regarding themselves, because the algorithm does promote outlandish and ridiculous behavior. The more graphic the thumbnail, the more ridiculous the thumbnail, the higher the views and the higher the engagement. The documentary does interview other family channels, and they also, in terms of negotiating with the algorithm, how much of their privacy are they willing to give up for notoriety. There's a huge difference between filming yourself and your personal experience and filming your child who has no consent and no real power to say no. And I imagine having an archive, a public archive of your most embarrassing moments, of your most intimate moments, might not age well. And I think that's why family channels are very unsettling to a lot of people. And that's not to say all family channels are like this. Ultimately, each family has to decide. But again, YouTube does have a responsibility to maybe draw these red lines and deter otherwise very exploitative behavior. One commonality among all these family channels is the number of children that you see. It's almost like the more children you have, the more views you get. Pregnancy announcements, the sort of journey in trying to have a child, talking about having a child, all of this equals views. The more children you have, the more pregnancy announcements you have, the more money you make. So it's kind of like, why not? In the case of the Stauffer family, they kind of hit a wall. There's only so many children you can have before people get bored. Plus, during this time, the number of family channels was also increasing. So they were seeing more and more competition. Like what they were doing wasn't so unique anymore, wasn't so special. You had to do a lot more to stand out. They had this brilliant idea. Instead of trying to have another child, why don't we just adopt a child? And not just any child, but a child with special needs. And I don't think their decision to adopt initially was coming from a malicious place. There are parents that want to adopt children that really do need a home. So I don't think initially it was like this mean-spirited thing. However, I do think they were motivated by views. And I do think a lot of their decision was based on the fact that the trouble of adopting this kid would be worth it because it would push them to the next level. And I don't think they really considered deeply how this child would fit into their family and whether or not they even had the time to give this child the care and dedication that he deserved. In the documentary, Myka details the adoption process, Huxley's medical history. Like, they go into depth about how difficult it is to adopt a child, how much paperwork is involved. So even before adopting the child, they do know what they were getting themselves into. What made the Stauffers very special is how they were able to build anticipation with their viewers. Like, they were almost counting down the days before they met Huxley. Like, their viewers were so invested in this child. They couldn't wait to meet him. They had a name picked out, a whole personality picked out before they even met him. And I think the way they were able to use this adoption to take their channel to the next level was the issue. Huxley's adoption did have a massive impact on their channel. I mean, they suddenly started getting brand deals from Walmart, from Mattel. Like, they were so close to breaking into the mainstream. Like, when it comes to influencers, there are levels, right? Like, there are influencers that kind of promote the same brands, I would say internet brands. And then there are like mainstream. And I think the Stauffer family were very close to hitting that kind of mainstream fame that they had been craving for so long. Like, if you're getting brand deals from Walmart, Amazon, like you're doing commercials from Mattel, like toy companies, like you really made it. The documentary does a good job of really emphasizing like this was an empire. Like, what the Stauffers were able to build was an empire. And a lot of the reason that they were able to accelerate their growth was because of this adoption. I do appreciate that the documentary blurred out Huxley's face because he had already been exploited enough. And so at first it's a bit distracting, but as the documentary goes on, you realize that it was the right decision. From the beginning, Huxley did not look very comfortable in the Stauffer home, and I think there were a lot of moments that they should not have filmed. When we're first introduced to Huxley, he is very uncomfortable. He doesn't want to go anywhere near them. They film him at the start, they film him on the plane, and this is a child that has just been adopted, and so one of the issues that people had looking back is that there were really no red lines. They filmed everything. So any attempts to make this child feel comfortable was probably derailed by having a camera in his face. The documentary interviews adoption specialists as well as fans of the Stauffer who are adoptees themselves. And the adoption specialist describes in details the trauma of adoption, because oftentimes these children have a whole history of their own. They have a whole past, and sometimes when families adopt these children, they approach them like a blank slate, not as individuals that have had a whole life prior to them. And that's how it felt the Stauffers were treating Huxley, like this kind of blank slate they could kind of mold in their image and add to their family and, you know, have this picture perfect family YouTube empire with. According to the Stauffers, they did their best to accommodate for Huxley, and that might be true. You know, like it might be true that it was very difficult for them. Now, the issue that a lot of people have is why put him on the thumbnail? You know, if you're saying that it's as bad as it is, maybe take a break and let the child adjust accordingly. I think the Stauffers could not have possibly predicted how big Huxley would become on their channel. Like, he became the star. Like, people tuned in to see how he was doing. They were rooting for him. And a lot of the reason they were rooting for him and a lot of the attachment that they had to him is because of the way that the Stauffers were able to present Huxley, the way that they were able to kind of get their audience invested into this young boy. A lot of the controversy about rehoming children, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with rehoming your child. I think what people had a problem with is they had Huxley for 2.5 years, and it really felt like they exploited him for content as long as possible before returning him to sender. And again, I don't want to say that their decision came from a malicious place, but it's a lot easier to justify returning a child with special needs than a healthy child. So I wonder how much of their decision to adopt a child with special needs was maybe based on, well, if this doesn't work out, we can always come up with some excuse to send him back. And so the issue began when people started noticing that Huxley was missing from the videos. And so people were really asking about him to the point where they had to disable comments. And I think the issue is whenever you put your life online and you don't have any red lines, like you don't actually create any boundaries, you can't really turn around and say to your audience, well, this is private, because you haven't really defined what privacy means. The situation got so bad that they had to release a video, the video being an update on our family. And this video broke the internet completely. And in the video, they boo-hoo and cry about how difficult it was and how their decision to rehome him was based on what was best for Huxley, and they wish him the best. And the whole video just came off as very self-serving. They came off as like the victims, as people that were doing their best. But the problem is, it's a double-edged sword, because prior to adopting the child, you had already known that this was going to be an uphill battle, and you made matters worse by basically just putting him on the internet. And I think the Stauffer family, I mentioned this at the beginning, but they were very skilled content creators, and I think they really felt they could control the narrative, because all we have to say is, you know what, he was a lot worse than we thought, he required a lot more needs, and so we did him a favor. And in theory, you would think that this would work. But I think a lot of the reason that their update failed is because of the investment that their audience had in this child. And this is an investment that they built in. And I felt like, again, it speaks to them as content creators, like the fact that they were able to get their audience so invested in their family and in Huxley's development. A lot of the outrage was coming from a good place. And I think, again, this whole thing about whether or not the Stauffers tried or didn't, I don't think is really the point. I think the issue is, regardless, exploiting your child for content and then deleting them off the internet is never a good thing. This is the issue when you have dedicated subscribers, because the Stauffers encouraged a parasocial relationship with their viewers. They would get letters from them. They would respond to like personal messages, giving them like personal advice. And the type of relationship that they had with their viewers was not normal. They had a very intimate relationship with their viewers, and I think that intimacy is why people were so distraught and so hurt. So these viewers, these loyal fans, began a deep dive. They went back through like hundreds and thousands of videos, and they found that actually Huxley was not being treated as well as they said he was. And one video in particular was pretty damning, of Myka describing how they were going to downgrade his speech therapist while wearing like a Cartier bracelet. And so it felt like they've kind of milked him for all that he was worth, and now they were giving him back. And the documentary, like towards the end, really touches on, like focuses less on the Stauffers and more on the outrage and the aftermath, the reaction videos from YouTubers, from journalists, and their sort of accountability in terms of turning this story into a circus. A conversation to be had about ethics, like how do you report on a story like this? And I think it comes down to the Stauffer family, and again, why their channel was unique. There were no red lines. They showed everything. Right? Like that's a lot of the reason they were able to build the rapport with their audience. And when you don't have any red lines, you develop parasocial relationships with your viewers to get them to buy products, to manipulate them into doing what you want, then you can't really turn around and say, oh, this is off limits, because you haven't defined what is off limits. I really think the Stauffers thought like maybe they would get some backlash at the beginning and some support, but it was unanimous on the internet. I think that's what was so shocking about the story. Like no one was on their side. Like no one could even see it. And overnight they were completely canceled. Brand deals gone. They disappeared off the internet. I believe James's channel is still up, but it more has to do with car repair and things like that. But Myka has not been heard from since the incident, and I think this is definitely a cautionary tale. Since the Stauffer family, the internet has definitely gotten worse, and I hate to say that. In terms of family channels, like, the thing is, we don't really know the impact until these children turn 18 in 10 years and we start getting the story times of, I grew up on YouTube and here's my story. Like, I'm very curious to see what these children will have to say when they get older. Do you think that the Stauffer family is an interesting case study in terms of the limits of content creation? Because a part of being successful is developing a relationship with your audience, is being vulnerable, is being open, is being honest. But it's also about drawing boundaries and drawing red lines. I think it's definitely a warning for content creators. Like, you can manipulate your audience. You can kind of test the boundaries of that relationship between you and the viewer. Just know that that can backfire immediately. And I think what was so impressive about the Stauffers is that I don't think everything they showed on camera was fake. I don't think everything about them was disingenuous. However, I think they were very, very good at manipulating the audience to see a side of them, to see them in the best light possible. The Huxleys exposed them in such a way in that, not everything that glitters is gold. Overall, I think it's a fascinating documentary. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.